Thank you, Danielle. It is my honor to introduce the recipient of this year's Ridenhour Book Prize, Seth Rosenfeld, and his book, Subversives, the FBI's War on Student Radicals and Reagan's Rise to Power. We live in a time in which the legal and practical restrictions on our government's ability to spy on its own citizens are weakening by the day. A decade ago, the law required the government to obtain a court order to wiretap Americans' international communications. Today, no individualized court order is needed. A decade ago, customs agents were subject to a directive that required them to have reasonable suspicion in order to search the contents of your laptop when you returned home from overseas travel. Today, agents are free to copy and read all of the files with no basis for suspicion whatsoever. In 2001, FBI agents had to have some reason to suspect wrongdoing in order to send undercover agents or informants into places of worship. Today, the FBI can and does infiltrate mosques at will. When I tell my friends and colleagues, particularly the younger ones, about these changes, the reaction I often hear is, "So what? I'm not a terrorist or a criminal. I have nothing to hide." For years, attempting to answer this argument has been one of the most frustrating and difficult tasks I've faced as an advocate. My answer now is this book. Seth has presented unassailable evidence of the FBI's ruthless campaign to disrupt and punish lawful political activity on the Berkeley campus in the 1960s. No one who reads this book can maintain the illusion that the mere collection of information by government officials is no cause for concern. No one who reads this book can doubt that unfettered powers to collect information can be and will be abused, not because the officials we entrust with these powers are evil, but because they are human and subject to all the human weaknesses that are so vividly illustrated in this book: ambition, fear, pettiness, and blind ideology. What's particularly wonderful about this book is the way that it animates this lesson. Seth is a gifted storyteller, and the book captures the personalities and the relationships that drove this saga. It makes the people, the events, real. And making the abuses of the past real to people who either didn't live through them or didn't know about them or didn't really believe them is the best way, and perhaps the only way, to make today's threats to liberty real as well. Perhaps not surprisingly, the government was not eager to help Seth in this effort. He spent 30 years battling the government in Freedom of Information Act lawsuits in order to obtain the 300,000 documents that he used to write this book. I used to work at the Department of Justice, and I defended the government in FOIA litigation, and I can tell you, you need to measure time spent in FOIA litigation like dog years. So 30 years of FOIA litigation feels like roughly 2 centuries of misery. Seth's persistence and his dedication were extraordinary. He scored some truly stunning victories. Most striking to me, he convinced multiple federal judges that the documents compiled by the nation's leading law enforcement agency could not be described as law enforcement records because they had no rational nexus to law enforcement. That finding says it all. The fact that you may not be doing anything that's of interest to law enforcement is no guarantee that the FBI will never be interested in you. I suspect that if Seth were to file similar requests today, his battle might be even more difficult. Rather than simply stamping "do not file" on the records of black bag jobs, the FBI would classify them, which would pretty much take them out of reach in the context of FOIA. I don't know what the actual classification levels were in the 1960s, but I do know that in 1995, there were 3.6 million decisions to classify information, and by 2011, there were 92 million decisions to classify. The secrecy fortress is in many ways more impregnable now than it has ever been. In the prologue to his book, Seth writes, "Above all, this book illustrates the dangers that the combination of secrecy and power pose to democracy, especially during turbulent times. That danger is alive and well today, and we owe a debt of gratitude to Seth for the powerful illustration he has given us. I'm delighted to present the Ridenhour Book Prize to Seth Rosenfeld."